Welcome to Quiz Cues. This is amazing. Are you ready to play Cluephoria? Guess the answer quickly to score more points. Clues are revealed one by one. After the last clue, the answer is revealed. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Are you ready? Let's go! Who am I? I was a self-taught lawyer who argued cases before the Supreme Court. I once represented a railroad company in a major legal case. I suffered from severe bouts of melancholy throughout my adult life. I was the first president to wear a full beard while in office. I held an unsuccessful patent for a device to lift boats over shallow water. Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was the 16th president who led the nation through civil war and was a self-taught lawyer. He won a landmark tax case for the Illinois Central Railroad that made him one of the most sought-after railroad lawyers in the Midwest, and his tragic assassination made him one of the most revered figures in American history. Who am I? I was a teenager when a court convicted me of cross-dressing and heresy, sentencing me to death. A future king of my nation received his coronation because of my military campaigns. My trial was overturned decades after my execution. My ashes were reportedly thrown into a river so no relics could remain. Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc was a French heroine who led armies against English forces during the 100 Years' War. Her ashes were cast into the Seine River so no relics could be venerated, and her eventual canonization made her a lasting symbol of courage. Who am I? I was a farmer who experimented with crop rotation at my estate. I bred a unique breed of hunting dog at my estate by crossing English and French hound breeds. I rejected a salary for my highest office, requesting only expense reimbursements. I operated one of the largest whiskey distilleries in the new nation at my home. I warned against permanent foreign alliances in my final address to the nation. George Washington. Washington was the first president and commander of the Continental Army during the American Revolution. He bred the American foxhound by crossing English and French hound breeds at Mount Vernon, and his decision to step down after 2 terms set a democratic precedent still honored today. Who am I? I was the first British monarch to live in Buckingham Palace, which had previously been known as Buckingham House. I was the target of at least 7 separate assassination attempts during my reign. Through strategic marriages of my children and grandchildren, I became related to nearly every major European royal house. I earned a familial nickname that referenced my continent-wide royal descendants. Queen Victoria. Victoria was Queen of the United Kingdom for over 63 years during an era of industrial expansion. She became known as the Grandmother of Europe after arranging marriages for her 9 children into nearly every major royal house, and her reign defined British culture and politics. Who am I? I studied law at a historically black university, but was expelled for participating in a student protest before completing my degree. Before entering politics, I competed in an individual combat sport at a junior level. I adopted a clan name that became more commonly used than my birth name. After taking the highest office in my country, I established a commission where victims and perpetrators of past violence could publicly testify in exchange for amnesty. Nelson Mandela. Mandela was a South African revolutionary who became the country's first black president after 27 years in prison. He was known by the clan name Madiba, a term of respect reserved for elders within his Tembu tribe, and his commitment to reconciliation made him a global icon of peace. Who am I? I was named after a major Italian city where my parents were traveling when I was born. I defied my wealthy family's expectations by refusing to marry into high society. I suffered from a debilitating illness for much of my adult life that some researchers believe was brucellosis contracted during my overseas service. I created a circular statistical diagram that showed mortality causes over a year, pioneering the use of visual data graphics. Florence Nightingale. Nightingale was an English reformer who founded modern nursing during the Crimean War. She invented the coxcomb diagram to show mortality causes and used it to persuade Queen Victoria to reform military hospitals, transforming both healthcare and public health policy. Who am I? I never lost a major battle in over a decade of continuous military campaigns across 3 continents. I solved a famously complex knot puzzle, not by untying it, but by cutting it with a single sword stroke. I died suddenly in a palace after a prolonged drinking party. My empire was immediately divided among my generals who became rival kings. Alexander the Great. Alexander was a Macedonian king who forged one of the largest ancient empires in history. He famously sliced through the Gordian knot at Gordium, which legends said could only be untied by the future ruler of Asia, and his premature death at 32 remains a subject of fascination. Who am I? I was sent to France at age 14 to marry the future King Louis XVI. The journey required changing out of my native clothes at the border before entering my new country. I maintained a private estate on palace grounds where I escaped court etiquette by playing shepherdess in a purpose-built rustic village. During my imprisonment, my hair reportedly turned completely white overnight from stress. My young son died under mysterious circumstances while held in solitary confinement. Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette was the last queen of France before the Revolution, whose life of luxury became symbolic of royal excess. She was sent to France at 14 to marry Louis XVI, and her execution marked a turning point in European history. Who am I? I unified warring nomadic tribes through a combination of military genius and diplomacy. I created a code of laws that applied to all people in my domain regardless of social class. I promoted people based on merit rather than birth status. Genetic studies suggest a significant percentage of people in a vast continental region today carry my Y chromosome lineage. Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan founded the Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous land empire in history. Genetic studies trace his Y chromosome to roughly 1 in every 200 men across Central Asia today, and his legal codes continue to influence the region. Who am I? I worked as a clerk and bookkeeper in my youth before seeking a different path. I traveled between feudal states seeking a ruler who would implement my political philosophy. My teachings were compiled into a text not by me, but by my disciples after my death. My teachings emphasized filial piety and ritual propriety above all else. A Latinized version of my name became the basis for an English word describing a complex social and ethical philosophy. Confucius. Confucius was a Chinese philosopher whose teachings shaped East Asian civilization for over 2,000 years. His Latinized name became the English word Confucianism through 16th century Jesuit missionaries, and his ideas remain foundational to education and governance worldwide. Who am I? I was a chemist who proved that a widely believed theory about the origin of life was false by designing a curved-neck glass vessel experiment. I developed a treatment for a fatal disease transmitted by animal bites, testing it first on a young boy who had been attacked by a rabid dog. I saved an entire national textile industry from collapse by identifying microscopic diseases affecting silkworms. I founded an institute bearing my name that became a global research center. Louis Pasteur. Pasteur was a French chemist whose discoveries revolutionized medicine and public health. He saved France's silk industry and founded the Pasteur Institute, and his process of pasteurization and vaccines have saved countless lives. Who am I? I was a goldsmith by training before I applied metalworking techniques to create a revolutionary information distribution system. My most famous printed work had exactly 42 lines per page. I printed approximately 180 copies of my most famous work in a workshop, shared with a wealthy merchant who financed my work. I struggled with debt, and a court seized much of my workshop equipment. My most famous invention was later attributed to others before my contributions were rediscovered. Johannes Gutenberg. Gutenberg was a German goldsmith whose movable type printing ignited the Renaissance and Reformation. His most famous work, the 42-line Gutenberg Bible, printed around 1455, had exactly 180 copies, democratizing knowledge and laying the groundwork for the modern information age. Who am I? I was a mathematician who initially taught at a university in Pisa, where I reportedly dropped objects from a tower to test theories about falling bodies. I discovered 4 celestial bodies orbiting a gas giant planet. A rival astronomer suggested I name those celestial bodies after a powerful mythological figure and his lovers. My book defending a sun-centered model was written as a dialogue between characters, one of whom was widely interpreted as mockery of the reigning religious authority. Galileo Galilei. Galileo was an Italian astronomer whose telescopic discoveries supported the heliocentric model of the solar system. He discovered 4 moons of Jupiter and named them the Medicean stars after Cosimo de' Medici, and his sun-centered book brought him into conflict with the Catholic Church. Who am I? I was a sculptor who considered myself primarily a stone carver above all other arts. I signed only one of my works, a marble figure of a mourning mother holding her dead son, on the sash across the mother's chest. I wrote hundreds of sonnets and madrigals. Many of my poems were addressed to a young nobleman with whom I had a documented close personal relationship. I designed the architectural dome of a major church in my city, but it was completed after my death using a modified version of my original wooden model. Michelangelo! Michelangelo was an Italian Renaissance master whose sculptures and paintings set standards for artistic excellence. He signed only one work, the Pietà in St. Peter's Basilica, after hearing rumors of misattribution, and the Sistine Chapel ceiling remains among humanity's most celebrated art. Who am I? I was a portraitist who became famous for capturing the personality of Amsterdam's wealthy merchant class in group compositions with dramatic lighting. I compulsively collected art and exotic objects, accumulating debts that led to bankruptcy and the auction of my house. One of my largest group portraits was controversial because some subjects paid equal fees, but were depicted partially in shadow or cut off by the frame. Rembrandt. Rembrandt was a Dutch Golden Age painter whose portraits and use of light revolutionized visual storytelling. His masterpiece, The Night Watch, famously cut off several figures and plunged others into shadow despite equal payment, and his etchings offer an intimate chronicle of both his life and his era. Who am I? I published my early novels anonymously, attributing them only to a lady. I lived much of my life in a rural rectory with my clergyman father and unmarried sister. I once accepted a marriage proposal from a wealthy but awkward man, only to break off the engagement the following morning. I died at 41 from an illness that remains debated by medical historians. My unfinished final novel depicted a seaside resort town before completion was halted by my death. Jane Austen? Austen was an English novelist whose social commentary and romantic plots defined the Regency literary scene. Her unfinished final novel, Sanditon, depicted a seaside resort before her death at 41, and her works continue to inspire film adaptations 2 centuries later. Who am I? I began my working life at age 12 in a factory applying labels to pots of shoe polish. My father was imprisoned for unpaid debts when I was a child. I gave public theatrical readings of my own works that were so physically exhausting, they may have contributed to my early death from a stroke at 58. I kept a pet bird named Grip that inspired a fictional raven in another author's famous macabre poem. I separated from my wife after falling in love with a young actress. Charles Dickens. Dickens was a Victorian novelist whose serialized tales exposed the hardships of England's poor. His pet raven Grip appears in Barnaby Rudge and directly inspired Edgar Allan Poe's famous poem, The Raven, and his vivid characters made him the most popular writer of his age. Who am I? I worked as a dispenser in a hospital pharmacy during a world war where I learned about poisons that later featured prominently in my fiction. I wrote 6 romance novels under a different name that I kept secret from my readers for nearly 20 years. I was one of the earliest British women to master standing surfboarding in the Pacific. I wrote a play about a murder investigation that has been performed continuously in London's West End for over 70 years. Agatha Christie. Christie was a British crime writer whose novels and plays made her the best-selling fiction author of all time. She was one of the earliest British women to surf in Hawaii in 1922, and her play, The Mousetrap, has run in London's West End for over 70 years. Who am I? I was a theoretical cosmologist who worked on the mathematics of singularities and proposed that black holes emit thermal radiation. I held the same prestigious mathematics professorship at Cambridge that Isaac Newton had held centuries earlier. I appeared on a popular animated sitcom as a recurring character who used my distinctive electronic voice to make jokes about physics. Stephen Hawking. Hawking was a theoretical physicist whose work on black holes and cosmology reshaped modern physics. He held the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics chair at Cambridge and appeared as himself on The Simpsons, and his best-selling book made him a global ambassador for science. Who am I? I was an electrical engineer who worked for a famous inventor before our relationship soured over payment disputes. I became obsessed with the number 3 and had a compulsive need to walk around city blocks 3 times before entering buildings. I claim to have received signals from another planet using my Colorado Springs laboratory equipment. I died penniless in a New York hotel room despite holding hundreds of patents. Nikola Tesla. Tesla was a Serbian-American inventor whose alternating current system powers the modern electrical grid. He was obsessed with the number 3 and would only stay in hotel rooms with numbers divisible by it, and his eccentric personality made him a symbol of misunderstood genius. Who am I? I was a speech teacher who worked with deaf students and married one of my pupils. My father-in-law, a wealthy merchant, financed much of my experimental work. I raced another inventor to the patent office by only a few hours. I was the president of a scientific society whose magazine became one of the most famous educational publications in the world. I experimented with sheep breeding to try to produce more twin offspring. Alexander Graham Bell. Bell was a Scottish-born inventor whose work in sound transmission led to the telephone. He raced Elisha Gray to the patent office by hours and was the second president of the society behind National Geographic, and his dedication to helping the deaf shaped humanitarian progress. Who am I? I ran a small printing business with my brother before our aviation work. We later opened a bicycle repair shop where we developed the mechanical skills that informed our later experiments. I engaged in a decades-long public dispute with a major national museum that refused for years to credit us with being first to achieve powered human flight. I lived long enough to see aircraft develop from our fragile wooden machine to bombers and jets. Orville Wright. Orville Wright was an aviation pioneer who co-piloted the first powered aircraft at Kitty Hawk. He fought a decades-long credit dispute with the Smithsonian Institution that had favored Samuel Langley and lived to see aircraft evolve from wooden machines to jets. Who am I? I was a journalist who fought in a foreign civil war and was shot through the throat by a sniper. I later documented the experience in a memoir about propaganda and truth. I adopted a pen name that combined the name of an English river with the name of a local royal figure. I deliberately chose it because it sounded like a good round English name. I wrote a memoir about my experiences working in a Parisian restaurant kitchen and living among the destitute in London. George Orwell. Orwell was an English writer whose dystopian novels warned against totalitarianism and propaganda. He crafted his pen name from the River Orwell and King George to replace his birth name Eric Blair, which he felt was too upper class. And 1984 remains essential reading. Who am I? I was a struggling single mother living on state benefits when I began writing my first novel. I wrote my first novel in longhand at tables in various local cafes while my infant daughter slept beside me. I was rejected by 12 publishers before one finally accepted my manuscript on the recommendation of the CEO's 8-year-old daughter. I donated so much money to charity that I lost my billionaire status. I later published crime novels under a male pseudonym that was exposed by a law firm partner's husband. J.K. Rowling. Rowling is a British author whose fantasy series became the best-selling book franchise in history. She secretly published crime novels as Robert Galbraith until a law firm partner's husband leaked the secret, and her journey from struggling single mother inspired millions. Who am I? I was a TV news anchor who was fired from my first major reporting job for being too emotionally invested in the stories I covered. I was nominated for an Academy Award for my very first film role, playing a character in a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel adaptation. I opened an elite boarding school on another continent where I personally selected students from disadvantaged backgrounds. My media company name is my own first name spelled backward. Oprah Winfrey. Winfrey is an American media executive who transformed daytime television into a platform for personal growth. She named her company Harpo, her first name spelled backward, as a deliberate nod to silent comedian Harpo Marx, and her influence spans publishing, philanthropy, and entertainment. Who am I? I moved to a major American city at age 20 with only $35 in my pocket. I studied dance with a renowned choreographer before a knee injury redirected my career toward music. I adopted a surname from my mother's side of the family as my professional name. I worked as a nude art model to pay for my early dance and music lessons. I was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in my first year of eligibility. Madonna. Madonna is an American singer who redefined pop music and female agency across 4 decades. She adopted her stage name from her mother Madonna Fortin, dropping her father's surname, Ciccone, and her constant reinvention made her one of history's most influential entertainers. Who am I? I was born on an island off the coast of East Africa to parents of Parsi descent. I spent my childhood at a boarding school in India before moving to England as a teenager. I designed a band logo that incorporated the zodiac signs of all 4 members. I had a vocal range that reportedly spanned 4 octaves, though I never received formal operatic training. I left my London mansion and recording royalties primarily to a woman I called my common-law wife. Freddie Mercury. Mercury was a British singer whose 4-octave voice and theatrical presence defined the rock band Queen. He left his mansion Garden Lodge and half his estate to marry Austen, his former fiancée and lifelong best friend, and his live performances continue to influence musicians globally. Who am I? I was raised primarily by my aunt and uncle because my parents separated when I was an infant. My mother was later killed by a car driven by an off-duty police officer. I wrote a book of absurdist short stories and drawings that became a best-selling collection. I once staged a week-long bed-in protest with my partner as a non-violent demonstration for peace. I was expelled from art college for failing my exams. John Lennon. Lennon was a British musician whose work with the Beatles shaped popular music. His absurdist book, in his own right, became a bestseller, and his week-long bed-in protest with Yoko Ono made him a lasting symbol of peace activism. Who am I? I served as a paratrooper in an elite airborne division before an injury led to my discharge. I taught myself guitar by practicing for hours daily while living in cheap boarding houses. I performed a song at a famous festival that was widely interpreted as a protest against an ongoing war. I was known for playing a right-handed guitar upside down and restrung for my dominant hand. A posthumous studio album of my unreleased recordings became one of the best-selling albums of the 1970s. Jimi Hendrix. Hendrix was an American guitarist whose revolutionary playing transformed rock and blues music. He was left-handed, but learned it on a right-handed guitar flipped upside down because his father believed left-handed playing was devilish. And his posthumous album, The Cry of Love, became one of the 1970s best-selling records. Who am I? I worked as a laborer in a Delaware auto plant before returning to my island home to pursue music. I survived an assassination attempt at my home, where gunmen wounded my wife and manager. I was a devout follower of a religious movement that worshipped an Ethiopian emperor as a divine figure. I held a famous peace concert where I symbolically united 2 rival political leaders by joining their hands on stage. I died from a rare form of cancer that started under a toenail, which I had refused to have amputated due to my religious beliefs. Bob Marley. Marley was a Jamaican musician who brought reggae and Rastafarian culture to global audiences. At his One Love Peace concert, he joined the hands of rival leaders Michael Manley and Edward Seaga, and his messages of unity remain an enduring icon of social change. Who am I? I was discovered by a former international player at age 15 while playing for a minor youth team. I debuted for my country's national team within a year of being discovered, scoring in my first match. I played in 4 World Cups and remain the only player to win 3. I spent most of my club career with a single team in my home country despite lucrative offers from abroad. A rule in my sport was informally named after me because it was designed to prevent teams from keeping the ball by passing among defenders. Pelé! Pelé was a Brazilian footballer whose skill elevated the game to worldwide popularity. The informal back pass rule was introduced to stop goalkeepers from picking up intentional passes from teammates, and as the only player to win 3 World Cups, he remains the sport's most celebrated legend. Who am I? I failed to make my high school varsity basketball team as a sophomore and was sent to the junior varsity squad. I signed a shoe deal with a then-struggling athletic company that created a signature line so successful, it became a standalone billion-dollar brand. I was fined by my league for wearing the shoes because they violated uniform color rules. A food poisoning incident from suspicious room service pizza caused me to play one of my most famous championship games while severely ill. I later became a part owner of a NASCAR racing team. Michael Jordan. Jordan, a global sports icon, catapulted Nike into athletic apparel dominance with the Air Jordan sneaker, played for the Chicago Bulls, winning 2 sets of 3 championships, pausing for a year to play baseball. He later co-founded 23XI Racing, where Bubba Wallace drives the number 23 car. Who am I? I was banned from a major computer company as a teenager for exploiting a software bug to gain free computing time. I later negotiated a deal to provide an operating system I didn't yet own. I scored a near-perfect result on a standardized college admissions test. I wrote a scheduling algorithm for my high school that placed me in classes with mostly female students. I purchased the original manuscript of a famous scientist's notebooks at auction and later made them publicly available online. Bill Gates! Gates is an American technology entrepreneur who co-founded Microsoft and negotiated the deal for DOS, the operating system that launched the personal computer revolution. He purchased Leonardo da Vinci's Codex Leicester for $30.8 million in 1994 and made it publicly available online, cementing his legacy in both technology and cultural preservation. Who am I? I emigrated from my birth country to avoid mandatory military service in a government I opposed. I paid for my university education partly through web programming jobs and party hosting. I was once ousted as CEO from a payments company I co-founded while on vacation. I later named my space exploration company after a rocket pioneer from the early 20th century. I made a cameo appearance in a popular film franchise as a man drinking a beer in a bar scene. Elon Musk. Musk is a technology entrepreneur whose companies advanced electric vehicles and space exploration. He named SpaceX after rocket pioneer Konstantin Tsiolkovsky after rejecting Nova because it was also a Chevrolet model, and his vision for humanity's multiplanetary future dominates headlines. Who am I? I was a research chemist who helped develop a method to preserve ice cream by injecting air into it. I was the only female member of my team at the company. I survived an assassination attempt by an Irish paramilitary group while staying at a hotel for a political conference. I was portrayed by an Oscar-winning actress in a biographical film that depicted my later years through hallucinations and conversations with the ghost of my deceased husband. Margaret Thatcher. Thatcher was the first female Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. She survived the 1984 Brighton hotel bombing by the Provisional IRA that killed 5 people and destroyed her bathroom, and her free market policies left a polarizing but lasting legacy on British politics. Who am I? I was a minor German princess chosen for a political marriage after my ambitious mother wrote letters to a powerful Russian empress seeking a match. I came to power after my husband's mysterious death. Under my rule, my country defeated the Ottoman Empire in multiple wars. I corresponded extensively with French Enlightenment philosophers. I offered to inoculate myself against smallpox to encourage my subjects to accept the controversial medical procedure. Catherine the Great. Catherine was a German-born empress who ruled Russia for over 3 decades during its Enlightenment era. She came to power after her husband, Peter III, died under suspicious circumstances in a palace coup, and her smallpox inoculation in 1768 made her the first reigning monarch to undergo the procedure. Who am I? I suffered a severe head injury as a child when an angry overseer threw a heavy metal weight, which caused me to experience visions and sudden sleeping spells throughout my life. I led a military expedition during the Civil War that liberated over 700 enslaved people. I was the first woman in my nation's history to lead an armed military operation. I later petitioned the government for a pension equal to that of a soldier, which took decades to receive. Harriet Tubman. Tubman was an American abolitionist who escaped slavery and led dozens to freedom. She led the Combahee Ferry Raid in 1863, liberating over 700 enslaved people and becoming the first woman to lead U.S. troops in combat, and her lifelong advocacy made her an enduring symbol of resistance. Who am I? I was an orphan raised by a wealthy merchant family, though I had a contentious relationship with my foster father that led to my expulsion from university and eventual military enlistment. I created a fictional detective character who solved crimes through pure deductive reasoning, inspiring the creation of the most famous detective in English literature decades later. I died in a city where I was found delirious and wearing someone else's clothes. For decades, no one could locate my grave because it was initially marked with a small, unadorned sandstone. Edgar Allan Poe. Poe was an American writer whose macabre tales invented modern detective fiction and horror. He created Auguste Dupin in The Murders in the Rue Morgue, the first detective to use pure deductive reasoning, and his mysterious death remains a subject of endless fascination. Who am I? I was expelled from the same art school twice, once for insubordination and once for declaring that no one on the faculty was competent to examine my work. I created a painting of a landscape from my childhood that featured distorted timepieces. I claimed the imagery was inspired by watching cheese melt in the sun. I collaborated with a famous animator on a short film project about the subconscious that took decades to complete. I once delivered a lecture while wearing a deep-sea diving suit. Salvador Dali. Dali was a Spanish surrealist painter whose dreamlike imagery made him the movement's most famous figure. He collaborated with Walt Disney on the animated short Destino, a project about the subconscious that took nearly 60 years to complete, and his melting clocks continued to blur the line between art and performance. Did you keep track of your score? Post it in the comments. I'd love to hear your ideas on what you liked, disliked, what topics you'd like to see for future videos. Leave a comment to help me improve and subscribe to help me keep this going. We'd love to hear it. Thanks for playing Cluephoria. See you in the next game.